On a fog-draped platform, a late-night express sighs into a quiet station. Inside a sealed compartment, a passenger lies dead, a timetable abandoned on the seat like a battlefield map. The numbers inked in the margins don't just chart a route, they spell out a killer's itinerary. Every stop becomes a clue, every train change a possible alibi, and every minute you think you know the truth slips to the next scheduled moment. This isn't merely a crime story, it's a puzzle in which time is the weapon, and the railway timetable is the crime scene. Welcome to Trains, Timetables, and Murder, Crofts versus Real Cases. A courtroom of schedules, a lab of lies, and a detective who refuses to let time win. Context: the location, the victims, and their background. Setting the stage is not just geography, it's the rhythm of a country that lives by clocks, rails, and the daily pilgrimage of ordinary people. In this story, the surveillance and the sympathy come from the same source, the railway spine that carries towns and futures, now carrying fear as well. The stage: the East Midlands Corridor, a tapestry of small stations and hedge-road lanes that connect rural life to the broader national loom. The backbone is a network of timetables, signal boxes, and the constant negotiation between speed and safety. The era sits just before and between two great wars of memory, a time when railways were more than transport, they were arteries of identity, community, and ambition. The communities, two adjacent market towns that feel almost like twins, Swinford and Brackenhurst. Each has its own character. Swinford, with its red brick houses and a school bell that still rings like a ritual, Brackenhurst, with a parish church that has stood for centuries and a bakery whose bread smells like the morning itself. People know each other's routines and preferences, doors are kept unlocked a little longer than in larger cities. Conversations spill onto the platform as trains rush between stations. The victims: two ordinary lives, extraordinary pain. Victim A, Margaret Maggie Calder, 24, a diligent clerical worker in Swinford who keeps the town's record straight and the town's gossip at bay. Maggie is known for reliability, a quiet smile, and a pocket diary she uses to map her week, visits, shifts, and the little rituals that anchor her life. She's the type who would pause to help a stranger, then return to her desk with a coffee-stained memory of the day. Her family is close. Her mother still irons her shirts and tells her to watch the clock. Victim B, Clara Hartley, 21, a Brackenhurst library assistant with a bright curiosity and a stubborn independence. Clara loves local history, spends weekends cataloging old ledgers, and dreams of a future where she could write about the place she loves. She's a friend to many in Brackenhurst. She's the one who notices the small details of a life, the way a chair sits under a window, the cadence of a bus timetable, the way a voice changes when one is about to reveal a truth they've kept for years. The emotional weather. For Maggie and Clara's families, life suddenly narrows to a timetable of questions. Where were they expected to be at 9:15 p.m.? Who saw them last? What routine did they believe would keep them safe? The townsfolk, shopkeepers, teachers, bus drivers, station attendants, feel the tremor of fear in the ordinary, the return of a late commuter, the quiet dread that someone could be watching the rails and choose a moment to strike. The social and historical context. The world of Crofts-era railway crime is a world where timepieces, signals, and schedules become part of the investigative vocabulary. The public trusts the timetable as a guarantee of order, even as the timetable becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. In our story, the late 1920s and early 1930s atmosphere, economic unease, shifting social mores, a public hungry for rational explanations, colors every inquiry. The railway's precision invites a methodical mind to the case, while the human cost invites empathy for Maggie and Clara, their families, and the communities that will live with the memory of their last steps. The promise and peril of Crofts' logic. Freeman Wills Crofts popularized a detective's obsession with schedules, alibis, and the sanctity of the timetable. In this narrative, we mirror that logic and test it against a darker reality, a crime that uses the rhythm of trains to misdirect and to erase boundaries between plausible and impossible. The juxtaposition, Crofts' clean, clockwork reasoning versus the messy truth of crime, drives the tension that will unfold in the steps to come. The crime itself. The night is damp, the wind tugs at the platform's edge, and a late local train coughs into Swinford Station with that familiar, almost tired punctuality. Maggie Calder steps off the platform into the car, a quick glance over her shoulder at the clock on the wall. The hours are a language she understands. The carriage doors close with a sigh, the wheels begin their whispering chorus on the track, and the engine settles into a steady, unhurried rhythm. Inside the carriage, the air smells faintly of tobacco, pencil shavings, and damp wool. Maggie sits by the window, her diary tucked under her arm, the page from a local newspaper peeking from the edge of her bag. She isn't alone for long, the journey is a routine one, and she has a habit of letting her mind wander to the next day's meeting at the archives. The other passengers drift in and out of her world, a retired schoolteacher with a pipe, a young man who checks his watch every few minutes, a woman whose scarf flaps in the window's draft. Then the scene tightens into the moment that will thrum at the heart of this story. A sudden lurch along a spur of line, a breeze that slides through the carriage, and a high-pitched cry from a passenger in the next compartment. The train slows, then stops at a secluded siding where the night's hedges press close to the windows. The guard calls to the driver, something's wrong with the brake, and the lights flicker as the engine coughs again. In the next breath, all sound becomes a theater of fear. The carriage door to Maggie's compartment is found ajar. A tremor runs through the car as a hand, a gloved, careful hand, pulls Maggie's body toward the carriage's edge, away from the seat where she sat moments before, away from the clock on the wall that seemed to tick a slower tempo now. A trickle of red glitters along the edge of the seat cushion as if the night itself had pressed a single drop of truth into the fabric. But the most chilling clue isn't blood. It's the notebook Maggie always kept, a small ledger in which she logged the day's events. On the notebook's page, a margin has been scrawled with a set of numbers and a phrase that looks like a code, a sequence of times paired with station names, almost like a map. The words, "Turn right at the next signal," are there for the reader to notice, but the handwriting isn't Maggie's alone. Written in a different hand, one that's practiced and certain, there's a note, half erased, that implies someone else knew the route as well as she did. The scene shifts with the discovery. A porter, stumbling across the sealed compartment door, tests the lock and finds it stubbornly engaged from the inside. The compartment is intact, with no signs of forced entry, no weapon left behind in the aisle. The body's position, awkward and careful, suggests someone who wanted Maggie left precisely where she lay, as if the killer aimed to leave behind an invitation for the path to be traced later. Meanwhile, in Brackenhurst, the other half of the crime looms large as a parallel thread. On the same night, as dawn edges along the horizon, Clara Hartley boards another train to London to deliver a manuscript to a distant editor. The timetable and the world around her are the same rhythm of the rails, the same clockwork of departures and arrivals. She's not Maggie, but she might as well be a young woman navigating a world that asks a lot of a person who chooses to live by a schedule. Yet for Clara, the timetable is more than a calendar. It's a diary of a future she's carefully building. And this night, the same night, will push Clara into a danger where the timetable's precision becomes a trap. The moment of truth arrives as dawn brushes the railway platform with pale light. Clara never reaches her destination. Her seat remains, but her body is found later in a remote cut near Brackenhurst, the same kind of hedgerow that crops up in every rural crime. The body bears minimal trauma, but the signs of struggle, the torn edges of a notebook, the distant echo of a station bell, the broken thread of a scarf, speak to a moment when someone used a routine as a weapon and a timetable as a blueprint. What happened on that night is not simply a murder, it's a demonstration of a method. The killer didn't strike with a single blow, the killer orchestrated a move through time. The murder scenes are not isolated, they are linked by invisible lines, the lines of trains, the lines of memory, and the lines of the timetable that can be read like a map to the killer's mind. The crime feels orderly and cold, but the human cost, the families who will forever ask, "Where did our daughter go at 9:15?" is anything but. The investigation process, clues, suspects, red herrings, breakthroughs. In a Croftsian world, the investigation moves with the patient logic of a timetable. Clues line up, alibis drift into margins, and only when the pieces join does the pattern reveal its face. This step follows the detective's method: treat time as evidence, treat the railway as a microcosm of the country, and treat human psychology as a critical gear in the machine of truth. Clues that forced a closer look. The handwriting map in Maggie's notebook. The margins coded note, times and station names, begins as a curiosity, but it soon reads like a blueprint. An analyst realizes the times correspond not to Maggie's travel plan but to the network's official timetable across several days. The handwriting in the margin hints at a secondary author, someone familiar with the line's rhythm, perhaps a staff member, perhaps a passenger who knew where to be when to avoid suspicion. The sealed carriage and the unforced entry. The compartment's lock shows no signs of forced entry. The killer must have known how to operate the carriage's door from inside or out. It suggests an insider, or at least someone who had earned the right to pass through the train's private spaces at the right moment. The evidence trail. Tickets, receipts, and a shared route. A single, anonymous ticket stub is found in Maggie's bag, a stub that matches no board or ticket office purchase. It points toward a route that intersects multiple lines and stations. This stub helps tie Maggie's last movements to a particular train. It's not conclusive by itself, but it's a key thread. The Brackenhurst link. Clara's disappearance and death shares two structural traits with Maggie's: a late-night departure schedule and a secluded, hedgerow-laden exit. A fragment of a scarf found near Clara's body seems to originate from a local shop in Brackenhurst, a place where a schedule's edge and a person's reputation intersect. The public's gaze and pressure. A chorus of headlines questions police competence and the possibility of a serial killer on the loose. The press fuels a narrative about a train killer, while investigators push back with careful language, insisting that the answer will be found in the timetable's arithmetic, not in sensational shorthand. Suspects, red herrings, and the long shadow of motive. The railway insider, Harold Keane. A dispatcher who has worked in the Swinford-Brackenhurst corridor for years. Harold knows the line's quirks, the blind spots, the times when a signal box can be empty for a minute. He's respected, meticulous, but his familiarity with the schedule could be used to choreograph a crime that blends into the timetable's rhythm. The station master with a hidden past, Alfred Alf Dower. A man who keeps records neat and emotions at bay. Alf's alibi sits on edge because of a quiet, consistent pattern of late-night hours, a pattern that could align with a murder that needs precise timing to avoid detection. The passenger with a concealed identity, Mr. K. A traveler whose presence on the line isn't clear at first. He might appear earlier in the timeline as a benign commuter, but a closer look reveals an intimate knowledge of the route, the signals, and the minute-by-minute movement of trains along a chain of stations. The red herrings, the public's fear versus the truth. The idea of a train killer triggers a wave of suspects who fit into stock roles: the jealous lover, the disgruntled employee, the opportunist who exploited an overlooked corner of a station's routine. Each one has an alibi that seems plausible under the glow of late-night anxiety, but none holds up under sustained scrutiny. Breakthroughs, misdirections, and turning points. The timetable audit. A meticulous map of all trains along the corridor is reconstructed. The investigator cross-checks Maggie's diary, the margins, and the idea that the murderer used the timetable to select witnesses and avoid being seen. In one moment, an overlooked discrepancy in a signal box's log becomes a hinge. It reveals a moment when the network's official timetable diverges from the observed movement on a single night. The inside-out alibi. A key witness who would ordinarily be dismissed as unimportant turns out to have insider access to the train's interior. The witness's testimony, once read with Crofts' precise eye, aligns with an operational know-how of doors, compartments, and the timing of the crew's changes. The mailed envelope. A letter arrives to the local constabulary from a person who claims to have witnessed something on the night of the murders. The letter's handwriting resembles the margin's unknown author. The letter provides a new angle, a potential guard's memory of a routine that didn't align with the timetable's official narrative. The breakthrough moment. The murderer's plan relies on a precise sequence of trains: a departure in the early evening, a transfer at a major junction, and a late-night arrival at a final station. By reconstructing every leg of that journey, investigators realized the crime wasn't a random act but a carefully choreographed sequence designed to mislead investigators by exploiting the train system's own rhythm. The human element, motive, fear, and the culture of certainty. The investigators' cognitive weather. The team is a mix of methodical old-school detectives and a few younger analysts who believe in data-driven inquiry. The tension between tradition and new techniques, like cross-referencing timetables with passenger ledgers and logs, drives the suspense. The detectives carry the emotional weight of the case as they chase the truth through a labyrinth of schedules. The family's endurance. Maggie's family holds on to a quiet conviction that the truth, though slow, will be found in careful arithmetic. Clara's family, already familiar with the pain of a daughter's absence, embraces the investigators' work not just as a duty, but to honor their daughter's memory. The community's evolving mood. Swinford and Brackenhurst shift from familiar, comfortable towns to a landscape of watchful eyes and cautious steps. The railway's rhythm continues, but the rhythm now carries the weight of 2 unsolved deaths, and the townspeople learn to live with questions that echo through the station's waiting rooms. Twists, tests, and the axis of belief. The insider's confession that isn't a confession. A high-stakes interview reveals a partial confession, a phrase misremembered, a motive misattributed. The confession is enough to derail a hasty conclusion but not enough to vindicate innocence entirely, forcing the investigators to reweave the timeline with even tighter focus on the timetable's true sequence. The real case comparison twist. The investigation begins to contrast and contest Crofts' old logic with the new reality of a modern, data-driven age. The Crofts method still shines in showing how alibis, travel routes, and witness memory intersect, but it's joined by the obligation to test every claim against objective data, leading to sharper, cleaner deductions. The public sphere versus the pursuit of truth. Media coverage swells as the potential for a serial pattern is teased. The detectives push back against sensationalism, insisting that every claim be weighed against the ledger of the timetable, the station logs, and the concrete movement of trains. The public's belief shifts as more data is uncovered, but not without a price. Trust must be earned again, one scheduled minute at a time. The psychology of a world built on time, motivations, emotions, and the community. In Crofts' world, the crime hinges on the mind as much as on the timetable. Step 5 elevates the inner lives of everyone connected to the case, the victim's own psychology, the perpetrator's rationalizations, the investigator's cognitive burdens, and the community's collective heartbeat under the strain of fear and suspicion. The victims, Maggie and Clara, in their own words, imagined. Maggie called her a conscientious, hopeful young woman who believed that order and routine saved lives. She kept a diary in which she tracked both her duties and her dreams, perhaps a future in archival work or local governance. If she had a voice inside the story, it would be quiet resilience, a habit of turning fear into plan and plan into action. Clara Hartley, a bright, curious mind who valued knowledge, connection, and a sense of boundless possibility. Her notebooks would reflect a curiosity about the past to shape the future, and a keen interest in how small choices, like a planned train journey, could ripple into someone else's life. The perpetrator, the mind that uses the timetable as a weapon. The perpetrator would be portrayed as someone who views time as both shield and blade. They live for the control that a perfectly choreographed journey gives them, a sense of mastery that's both pathological and precise. Their motive might be a blend of ego, grievance, and a distorted belief that time itself should bend to their will. The psychology would emphasize the cold, mathematical thinking that Crofts detectives often encounter. A mind that believes a plan, once executed with exact timing, becomes an art form. The investigators, the balance of method and empathy. The lead detective would be portrayed as a person who trusts data but never forgets the human cost. He's patient and rigorous, a believer in the timetable but not in the timetable's ability to hide truth forever. His colleagues bring a mix of experience and modern techniques. One is a young analyst who challenges traditional methods with data-driven insight, and another is a veteran who understands the social weight of a case that shatters a community's sense of safety. The community, a living character. The towns, Swinford and Brackenhurst, become something more than background. They are a character in their own right, the places where people go to be seen, raise families, run businesses, tell stories on the platform, and keep the past close enough to touch. The case forces the community to confront its own vulnerabilities and to re-examine how trust is earned, especially when the clock is the only honest witness. The moral tension. The narrative keeps returning to the idea that truth requires both patience and courage. Crofts taught us to respect the clock. The modern detective reveals that the clock must be tested against memory, motive, and the messy unpredictability of human beings. The balance between order and chaos becomes the moral center of the story, how to honor victims' memory without turning fear into a weapon that damages the living. Twists and turns, plot reversals, red herrings, and the final reveal. A Croftsian puzzle thrives on misdirection and a patient, cumulative revelation. Step 6 heightens suspense through a series of twists that force recalibration of every previously accepted fact, leading to a final, satisfying reveal that respects the logic of time and the humanity of those involved. The two-path conclusion. Early in the search, investigators consider two possible culprits: the insider with intimate schedule knowledge and the outsider with a motive tied to a past grievance with the railway. As new clues emerge, the two paths intersect in a surprising way. The insider's alibi depends on a cover story that simultaneously validates the outsider's presence on other nights. This shock forces the team to re-examine who had the freedom to move in and out of the carriage spaces and who had the most to gain from Maggie and Clara's deaths. The marginal note's true author. The handwriting analysis reveals that the margin scribble was not Maggie's. It's someone who studied her life and her work and understood her routines so intimately that they could imitate her voice on a page. This discovery not only reframes the motive but also kills a major misdirection. The killer wasn't merely using a timetable, they were mimicking the victim's life. The insider's hidden motive revealed. The insider's motive emerges as a complicated mix of personal grievance against the railway's bureaucratic system and a private grievance around a love interest who had a separate, secret life connected to the timetable's routes. The shame and pride of a long unspoken history become the psychological engine behind the crime. The outside's countermove. An alternate suspect, an outsider with a plausible, socially acceptable reason to travel the line at those hours, turns out to be a decoy, perhaps an attempt to mislead investigators away from the true storyline. The outsider's confession or partial admission reshapes the narrative's entire arc, forcing the team to sift away the misdirection and view the puzzle through the insider's lens. The climactic synthesis. The true solution hinges on constructing a precise sequence of events. The exact trains, exact crew changes, the movement of doors and windows, and the timing of the countermeasures that hid the killer in plain sight. The final solution aligns the timetable's arithmetic with the human web of relationships, revealing a plan that was elegant in its restraint and devastating in its impact. The moral and ethical coda. The resolution doesn't sanitize the lives lost or the fear inflicted. It uses the courtroom and the press to temper the triumph of the detective with the enduring memory of Maggie and Clara. The community gains a new understanding of privacy, accountability, and the balance between security and liberty in a rail-driven society. Step 6 ends with the sense that the Crofts method, when blended with real-world scrutiny and modern investigative tools, can still strike with clarity, provided it respects the humanity at its center. The next step will deliver the final resolution and the broader impact of the case on policing, law, and the culture of the railway. Resolution: how the case is solved or unsolved, and the broader impact. The resolution. The final revelation comes from a confluence of Crofts' clockwork and a contemporary, evidence-driven synthesis. The insider's identity is proven through a combination of walk-through timelines, logs, handwriting analysis, and corroborated statements from staff who can confirm the movement of a particular door, a particular ticket, and a particular night's crew change. The margins of Maggie's notebook aren't just a clue, they become a key piece of the case that, when read correctly, seals the killer's fate. The perpetrator is identified and charged with murder in both cases, the motive is unmistakably tied to a long-simmering grievance against the railway bureaucracy and a personal history with someone who had access to the timetable's life. The sentences reflect the gravity of 2 lives lost and the community's demand for justice. The court, the press, and public memory. The case becomes a milestone in the public understanding of time, travel, and safety. The press coverage shifts from sensational, train killer, headlines to a sober, technical explanation of how the investigation used time and transit data to reach a verdict. This, in turn, fuels a broader conversation about how modern policing can and should handle sensitive data and public fear. The impact on policing and criminology. The Crofts-style method, emphasizing alibis, timetables, and a careful reconstruction of movement, meets modern evidence practice, cross-corroboration of schedules, logs, and digital-era data. The case becomes a reference point for how to balance rigorous, data-backed investigation with a respectful, humane approach to victims and communities. The railway's role in society is reimagined, not merely as infrastructure, but as a living ecosystem of schedules, permissions, and human interactions that can either protect or endanger those who travel. The case forms the basis for better training, stronger procedural safeguards, and a more nuanced public conversation about privacy and security. The survivors and the memory. Maggie and Clara's families, though forever touched by tragedy, find ways to honor their daughters' lives through memorials, archives, and community safety initiatives. The story becomes a lasting reminder that time can protect and pierce in equal measure, and that the society built on trains must be one that treats time with respect and humanity. Epilogue. Crofts' spirit in the modern era. The narrative closes by acknowledging the enduring appeal of Crofts' meticulous, puzzle-driven approach and how it translates into contemporary investigative practice. It honors the idea that every timetable is a story, every platform a stage, and every passenger a potential witness to the truth.